All right. Well, welcome everyone. Share screen here and we'll get kicked off. All right. Well, welcome to this Kochava webinar event. We are going to be unpacking WWDC 2024. And we're going to be talking about key takeaways for marketers. So we have a couple of awesome colleagues on the call here today with me. I'm going to introduce them in a moment. But before we do that, I wanted to go through some quick announcements. So number one, please connect over the chat. We have our very own Matt Goodrich from my team who's in the chat today as our community manager. So be sure to say hello. Let Matt and the whole crew here know where you're joining from, what you do at the organization where you work. We'd love to hear from you. Additionally, there's a Q&A tab in the sidebar as well. So if you have questions, we love questions. We'll try to get to them throughout the webinar, not just save them all till the end. So ask them in the Q&A tab. If you do forget and you put it in the chat, Matt will bump it over to the Q&A tab and we'll be sure to see that as well. The webinar is being recorded. We always typically get that question too, because I think folks are eager to watch it afterwards if they miss any of it or want to catch a certain part again. So that will be sent out in a follow-up thank you email, probably about 24 hours after this event is over. So sometime tomorrow, I'll keep an eye out for that email and you can watch it on demand. We also have some resources that we've put together. So if you visit the docs tab, there's a few helpful, there's a blog post, a product page, as well as a guide around SKAdNetwork. So visit there if you want to explore some additional resources. You can open those in another tab and check them out after the event today. And last but not least, of course, we're only here for an hour and there's a lot to discuss and future implications around what happened at WWDC 24. So be sure to connect with us online across Facebook, X, and LinkedIn. Continue the discussion with us there and stay up to date. So with that, let me go ahead at this point and I'd like to introduce our speakers. So obviously I said hello at the opening, but I didn't share my name and who I am. So I'm Jeff Richardson, Director of Product Marketing here at Kochava. And let's have Ethan and Nathan introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ethan Lewis. I'm the CTO of Kochava. And thankfully, last week after WWDC, I got to mark myself safe and excited to talk through all of the various changes and announcements that took place.
Thanks, Ethan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nathan Darst, Director of Software Engineering here at Kochava. And much like Ethan, following last week, I did breathe a sigh of relief along with many others in response to what was not announced or otherwise conveyed. So looking forward to the webinar. Thanks.
Yeah, well, thank you both for joining us. And in case there's anyone on today that hasn't worked with Kochava before, this is the first time you're hearing from us, a brief note about who we are, what we do. We were one of the first mobile measurement partners. So MMPs founded in 2011. So for well over a decade, we've been helping marketers and app developers measure and optimize their mobile apps, especially on iOS and Android. Today, we measure far beyond mobile, all channels, all devices, connected TV, gaming, etc. So we have that fulsome omni-channel presence across all connected devices. But every year, WWDC is something we watch very closely for the many thousands and thousands of iOS apps that we help app marketers measure and optimize. So excited to unpack some of the takeaways. I'd like to open with a question to both Ethan and Nathan and just say, is there anything that happened or didn't happen at WWDC this year that surprised you?
Yeah, I think a lot of really exciting announcements around AI and the rollout. I think that was something that was expected. We've seen other major partners in the space do similar announcements. The one that I was not expecting related to the AI announcements was the OpenAI ChatGPT partnership. That's something that I think as Apple continued to roll out how they were, really leveraging AI capabilities, being on device or even on some of their own silicon and their data centers, was certainly surprised and excited about the partnership and how they can interoperate with some of the ChatGPT capabilities. So excited, unexpected, but cool to see either way.
Yeah, Nate, how about you? Anything?
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised that we didn't hear more about private relay being rolled out to a wider group of audiences, devices, whatever it may be. pleasantly so, but surprised nonetheless. And to pile on to what Ethan said, the way that Apple has chosen to implement AI across their platform is very interesting. It's exciting. There's a lot of opportunity there in terms of, reaching users, whatever the case may be. But yeah, looking forward to hearing more about that and how it does manifest itself across the platform.
Yeah. Oh, me too. Well, let's see. Let me walk through a quick just highlight of what we're going to hit on across this next little under an hour, just so everyone knows what we've got ahead. We're going to touch on, obviously, AdAttributionKit. So AAK is the acronym, but it's actually AAAK if you're talking about the app AdAttributionKit, and WAC if you're talking about the web AdAttributionKit. So we'll have some fun with those acronyms and what that means for SKAdNetwork, or as we often refer to it, SKAN. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the Digital Markets Act and third-party app stores, which seems to have been a catalyst behind the AAK, I think. We'll also cover Apple Intelligence, and we're going to talk a bit about visionOS and the Vision Pro and what we kind of foresee and think might happen in that new realm of VR. So that's the agenda. I would like to, at this point, actually open with a poll as we jump into talking about SKAN and the AAK. So I'm going to open that poll now. And the question, if you go to the polls tab, is, are you currently using SKAN? So if you can jump in, we love participation and engagement. We'd just like to see what share of the audience is currently using Apple's SKAdNetwork for measurement of their campaigns on iOS. I'm going to go ahead and bring up the results on screen here just so we can see it's pretty even right now. Sometimes these continue to change with 50-50. So as this unfolds here, it's interesting because I think part of the discussion was the fact that, SKAN 5 has somewhat been erased from Apple developer documentation, which was announced last year at WWDC 23, was meant to include re-engagement. It seems like re-engagement is now actually going to fold into the release of the AdAttributionKit. So yeah, we're at about even, neck and neck. Does this surprise you at all, Ethan? Nathan, any thoughts on these results?
It doesn't surprise me, and I think that as we start to unpack some of the topics, it'll be really interesting to hit on some of the other means of attribution that are taking place specifically on iOS, and we can call that probabilistic attribution or modeled attribution, but I think what we have seen is some of the limiting features within SKAN have caused a push in an adoption race with other media partners where other solutions are a little bit more wholesome in the data that's being received. So, it doesn't surprise me. I think what is really interesting, and we'll go through it a little bit more in detail in a few minutes, but the continued progression of SKAN, now potentially AdAttributionKit, and what that's going to translate over the course of the next year or so. Excited to see the continued feature development. We saw some really nice announcements around the re-engagement support, and hopefully we continue to trend in that direction to where some of the core features, hindering some of the adoption of SKAN start to go away.
Yeah. I'm going to leave this poll open. We're just like neck and neck, and now SKAN is a little behind. It's buffing up on the no here. So I'm going to leave this poll open in the background and stop sharing screen on it. But if you haven't engaged with it yet, feel free to make your way over to that poll tab and let us know whether you use SKAN or not. Let me close that up here, and I'm going to jump back to slideshow because I really want to touch in on the AdAttributionKit in more detail here. It's kind of fascinating. I have to say I'm going to miss the acronym SKAN because it's become so synonymous. But so yeah, can you unpack the AdAttributionKit for us, Ethan and Nate, in a bit further detail? Like, it seems almost identical to SKAN, but with a couple of exceptions. So can you kind of unpack it for us from a high level and zoom in where you think it's appropriate?
Yeah. So I think the large TLDR of the AdAttributionKit is the fact that it's really an umbrella term that a lot of the attribution frameworks directly on iOS can roll under. And that's exciting. Hopefully that means we start to see more interoperability across the platforms. You know, one wish list item that I have specifically long-term, mainly on Apple devices, would be to start seeing some type of cross-platform capability, if ever possible. But you know, I think that's the large majority. Is it's a new umbrella term where we can start to pull in things like the web ad attribution kit, the ad attribution kit, and start to see some synergies between those APIs for developers to start leveraging. In addition to that, obviously, the one key missing element with the re-engagement support being added to AdAttributionKit. So I think, you know, overall, we'll likely start to see more of a pull through on AdAttributionKit long term. And you know, I think to your point, seeing Scan 5 starting to be pulled back out of the developer docs are a really good sign that we're going to see a convergence of these terminologies from Apple.
Yeah, I would agree with that take completely. I think that, you know, AdAttributionKit is going to replace Scan, you know, wholesale at some point. I don't think I think what we see inside of the developer documentation, all the way down to, if you watch some of the videos, you know, for example, we even saw the addition of a first class toggle for the AdAttributionKit developer mode, you know, and to take that step, you know, that's something that at least signals to everyone that is the future going forward. You know, we're not going to see two different toggles, for example, for Scan and AdAttributionKit. So a lot of indicators there, a lot of footprints that we're seeing that would indicate that Scan is certainly going to be replaced by AdAttributionKit. Although I would go so far as to say, you know, in name only. I mean, what's being offered at the end of the day is still the same thing. It's just an iteration of what was Scan 4. Now is, you know, what Scan 5 was expected to be, we're seeing manifested in AdAttributionKit. And certainly some of that is in response to the need to support, you know, third-party app stores, things like that. But also, again, very iterative. We're seeing the re-engagement component of that, you know, being supported inside of AttributionKit. And, you know, I would just expect to see that iteration continue.
Yeah,
and definitely a relief. You know, the fact that the APIs coming out are so similar. There are some differences. Obviously, there's some interoperability between the two different frameworks, but not having to understand a new postback framework or a new conversion value framework that was first introduced with Scan was certainly a relief from my end. I think that's already a challenge for a lot of marketers and organizations to understand and start to take on, and how it relates to their performance. But glad to see a continued development on that same path versus some net new framework that we're required to integrate with.
Yeah, for sure. From a developer standpoint, very easy to you know, integrate AdAttributionKit alongside of Scan, zero lift for the most part, other than changing some names of some API calls.
Yeah, even the flow chart here that, you know, I recognize this because it's exactly identical to the SKAdNetwork documentation flow chart. So like literally line for line, box for box, word for word. At least from I might have missed something. Yep. But that was interesting, and I think, you know, talking about the overlap, if you will, like just seeing the discussion about the article about the interoperability between the two. One question I have is as we look at Scan 4 adoption, it's still pretty low. I tried to get refreshed numbers for today, but when I looked at the start of the year, it was still, I think, under 15%, at least in terms of all SKAdNetwork attributed kind of transaction volume we see. Scan 3 is still the current kind of leader. So I'm interested what you think about it from an adoption perspective. Usually, you know, the new Scan is announced, and then there's kind of this delay and lagging adoption curve. Do you think the support of third-party app stores, although we'll see how fast that becomes a real big momentum, will catapult people past Scan 4 or past Scan 3 to Scan 4 and right to AAK, or right over Scan 4 into AAK? Any thoughts about what we might see there?
I think more than the third-party app store, the support for re-engagement is going to be the big driver for adoption this go around. I think when you compare some of the nuances between SKAD 3 and SKAD 4, you know, I think there are some quality of life features that developers get, and certainly from like a signal availability, multiple postbacks, et cetera, coming out. But there really wasn't a key driving feature to push forward to adopt SKAd 4.0. So I think that's going to be the big X factor in this, is the re-engagement support. Maybe we'll start to see some growth from third-party app stores and starting to take this on from a privacy-centric way. I think once we get into some of the DMA stuff, we'll have some more comments on it. But I think it'll be really interesting to see how developers can leverage a privacy-centric attribution kit. Whereas, again, what we see holistically right now is a lot of that signal going into the probabilistic and modeled space. So it's super exciting from a privacy-centric perspective that we're now going to see this bridge into some non-App Store, Apple App Store markets. But yeah, re-engagement, I think, will be the core driving of adoption.
And yeah, I know Private Relay. Yeah, and Nate, you had mentioned Private Relay earlier, and even the likes of privacy manifests. And do you think, eventual rollout or further expansion of those will help drive adoption of SKAN as well? Because even like that poll, like 50-50, right? Like
right. And help is an interesting word. It will certainly force adoption of SKAN on some level, as those, whether it be, policies or guidelines are enforced, which, to some extent aren't enforced today. So yeah, I think we'll see more adoption as those get enforced, and there's a little bit of an unknown component to that right now as well. I mean, May 1st, we saw the requirement, at least the first set of requirements of privacy manifest for app store submissions, things like that. But we'll see how far Apple takes that in terms of enforcement, and we'll see what kind of SKAN adoption follows. But that's really the only option there is, as more of those policies are enforced more strictly.
And there's some other, interesting things within the documentation as well. Like I know there's some work being pushed for more of a developer mode for the SKAd and AdAttributionKit ecosystem that allows for testing of the framework a little bit more easier. So, that's a good sign. Hopefully that means that we'll be able to streamline a little bit of the testing that already is in place today to help further drive some of the visibility and expectations for marketers on what they can expect. But the other thing I think is really interesting around the SKAd interoperability comment is, for the most part, there was a lot of speculation about how the data is stored on device, and whether or not it's last click, or whether or not we're storing all impressions for a specific campaign for 30 days, et cetera, et cetera. And in the operability doc, there's actually some interesting call outs on how prioritization takes place within SKAd and the AdAttributionKit. So, for one of the first times, I think we start to see things like click through being prioritized over view through, and the amount of impressions that are stored on device and that are eligible for a conversion to attribute to. And just really interesting to see. And I think all of that's evident from needing to provide this information for developers when integrating with the third-party app stores. So some pretty cool stuff in the docs for those that are interested.
Yeah. Do you think there's ever going to be any attribution configurability around SKAdNetwork? I know that's like they tell us what it is, but there's no real option to intervene in that and shift gears if you wanted to, at least not that I know of.
Yeah, it's a great question. I would probably go out on a limb and say not in the near future would I expect to see those types of configurations, and especially around something like a look back window, for example. And mainly because, again, that starts to interact with some of the core operating system on device that I don't expect that we would get access to. But certainly seeing the continued investment in both developer experience and the tooling, streamlining the APIs, getting things a little bit easier to test, those are all great signs for continued investment. And then again, continuing to listen to marketers around some of the missing features. It's somewhat of a who knows, but would be really cool to start seeing some type of configuration be added to the framework.
Yeah, I think,
Yeah.
I mean, I would agree with that and say that, I think that'll come eventually. That, eventually is still a long ways off, but, there's certainly areas that, need attention and need improvement and need iteration that Apple acknowledges themselves within the documentation. With this, the recent edition of AdAttributionKit here, I think I saw a call out that, view through for re-engagement was not supported. But, as we all know, if you have to say it, then we know that people are going to want it. And it's just a matter of time before they add support for it. So it's good that I think their mind's in the right place. I think it's, we don't see iteration at the speed I think that we'd all like to see it from a developer's perspective, but I would expect that so whether we're talking about configurability or, feature additions down the road, I think those are coming. I think Apple's, they're focused in on what they need to be. It's just, it's a slow process.
Yeah. And I'd like to, talk about everything from re-engagement as well as like feature additions, right? Even configurable attribution potentially being one of them. But we've talked a lot about Google Privacy Sandbox lately for both web and Android. And so I'm curious, Ethan and Nate, your thoughts on re-engagement, right? Requires audience segmentation, and then if you're going to do it with a paid partner, like IDFAs aren't common anymore. So how do you effectively retarget to make that re-engagement feature usable in the first place? So can you talk through some of the things where you see right now a gap, and maybe prediction on how that might be filled in the future? I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're calling out two really big components that are certainly more of a challenge on iOS, and that is being able to do acquisition campaigns and targeting during the acquisition campaign, or re-engagement campaigns. And I think that's one of the big stark differences that we're seeing between AdAttributionKit and Privacy Sandbox is Privacy Sandbox, it has its own limitations, its own challenges, benefits, etc. But there are really big implementation details specific to those categories. So on Google Privacy Sandbox, when we're doing a comparison between the two, we're really talking about the attribution reporting capabilities that are offered. When we step into the re-engagement side, we're talking about protected audience. And within Privacy Sandbox, there are capabilities and frameworks for app developers to make any user that has installed or visited their property eligible for re-engagement through ad networks. So, if I had a crystal ball, I would say I would expect to start seeing some of that surface within the AdAttributionKit as well, likely through some type of eligibility for re-engagement. We're somewhat seeing that on the ad delivery side of AdAttributionKit, where we need to flag certain traffic types eligible for re-engagement. So, certainly we'll expect to see some changes there. But the other really big one that's missing is the Topics API on Google Privacy Sandbox, not really an equivalent in the Apple world. That's obviously Google's attempt to do targeting based on more behavioral or contextual attributes. Little bit of an unknown on how some of those frameworks can be driven on Apple. I think philosophically, though, there's two distinct camps, right? Like I firmly believe that Apple is taking the approach that for targeting and retargeting, user consent is required, right? Meaning we will expect to be able to leverage deterministic identifiers while they continue to exist, like the IDFA, to actually drive targeting. Google, on the other hand, I think is immediately approaching this as a more of a holistic, unconsented approach to how you can do privacy safe targeting and retargeting without exposing user details. At the end of the day, I think they're very similar in the outcome that you should expect to see as a marketer, as far as what we're able to report on from a attribution and measurement standpoint, but just two very different approaches on the early funnel of user capture within the frameworks.
Yeah, and to a lot of what Ethan said, totally agree with 100%. I would add that what I see, it's not really a difference, but big plus that's coming out of this is competition. And now it's not direct competition. Obviously, we're talking about two different platforms, but the fact that you can at least see what could be, in real time here as we move forward, that's only going to help both platforms in terms of what SKAN offers, what Google Privacy Sandbox offers, all that going forward. So I'm really excited to see that sort of, if you want to call it healthy competition, unfold over time. And then I will speak to just the what I'm really excited about specifically inside of Google Privacy Sandbox is the contextual, or kind of future support for contextual advertising, because I think that's going to be a big part of how advertising is handled in the future. We do have access to that, the contextual side of things on device, all that sort of thing. Obviously, privacy safe, privacy friendly, and I think I'm really excited to see how much that is supported and how much it's leveraged going forward.
Yeah, and I think we're starting to see a glimmer of Apple doing more and more profiling of users on device. So I know I don't want to get too far ahead of the conversation with the Apple Intelligence conversation, but it's going to be really interesting to see what they're willing to expose to an AI running directly on your device versus what they're willing to expose in a contextual way to advertisers and marketers, right? So certainly have the capability to do a lot of the contextual behavioral analysis that Android devices are capable of as well.
Yeah. I would like to, there's a question that came in from one of our audience members, Pat. It's not directly related to necessarily SKAN at this point, but it is a great question, which is support for deep linking and custom product pages, and whether that can be used to attribute users when we use a CPP in the ad campaign. So I know that we support custom product page use, right? So if someone has custom product pages, they can put the unique link where there's that extra value at the end that denotes not just their standard product page, but one of their custom product pages. And I guess the complication comes in when the attribution is through SKAN. You'd probably have to somehow in your campaign hierarchy designate an ad group or something specific to a CPP that could then roll up somehow under the campaign hierarchy that files into source identifier, right? In order to actually see that in your campaign information. It's probably a little granular, but if you have any thoughts on that, and then we can follow up with you directly too, Pat.
Yeah, that would be my understanding on the approach for the signal to flow through SKAd. Now, Nate, you probably have a better understanding than I do on what's eligible from something like the store attribution that we get through ASA, and if any custom product page fields come through as parameters on that request. But that would be the only other location that I would expect to potentially see something related to the custom product page.
Yeah, I mean, my mind first goes to the new re-engagement support inside of AdAttributionKit, which is obviously not SKAN, but will be at some point, I think. And that does surface a field or a value, if you want to call it that, within the app, so that you can identify that this did in fact, originate from, that source in terms of for re-engagement anyways. I don't know, it's a little too early to say, I think, beyond that, how the landscape here might change or not change, but what you described in terms of how that would be surfaced today is pretty much accurate.
Okay, good to know. Pat, let us know if that answered your question. If you have any follow-ups, feel free to post that in the Q&A as well. Well, let's jump on from SKAN versus Sandbox and talk a little bit more about the DMA. I'm curious about this in terms of how much of a catalyst do you think the DMA was for this shift from SKAN to ACK or WAC and AAK. Any more commentary about that and just larger implications in general of this shift, not just for Apple, but for the whole kind of ecosystem?
Yeah, I think, but before I dive too much into the DMA, I think it's always healthy context just to lay the landscape out. I think, the poll that we did earlier is a really good indication of the adoption of more privacy-centric tooling on Apple. and the lack of adoption thereof in some sense. And I think that's largely a factor of some of the gray area within the terms used for how things like modeled and probabilistic attribution can take place on Apple devices. So if you think of that for a minute and you're looking at the overall arching umbrella of what the DMA outlines, it obviously is a huge focus on consumer privacy. And I think that they do go hand in hand with the lack of adoption of privacy preserving technologies, largely being abstracted by Apple through AdAttributionKit or SKAd. A lot of large publishers in the space needed to take on themselves ways to circumvent some of those tools, I would say. Whether or not it's sanctioned or unsanctioned, we lump that into modeled and probabilistic attribution. So I think at the spirit of it, when you look at that from a macro lens, you can clearly see that for consumer privacy to be a forefront and to not give a competitive edge to what the DMA calls gatekeepers, we really need to open it up to third parties. And I believe that the reason why that's in my opinion, fun to highlight is there's a couple core principles of the DMA that are forefront. One is obviously the third party access to a competitive landscape for publishers. The second is access to tooling for privacy preserving attribution and measurement or advertising largely. And the third largely being access to the similar data sources that the major gatekeeper has access to. So it really levels the playing field. By doing that, I believe we will see a lot of these third-party app stores that are popping up forego some of their, what I would just throw out as less privacy-centric ways of doing measurement a la their own store. So I think that's the TLDR for me is really excited to see third-party app stores. That's one. I think large publishers will start to adopt that as a way to drive their own performance into app installs through their platforms. So obviously, a lot of the brands that you see here, I would expect over a period of time to start to see some of the app stores popping up directly from the publisher, and then all being tracked through AdAttributionKit for the performance. Without that, I think what you would have started to see are things more like the referral links or potentially some type of campaign link into the actual app install, the bundle install, and looking at how installers can grab some of that data when the apps are installed. So overall, I think the DMA was the critical driver for AdAttributionKit, if we're being honest. And I think that Apple responded well, and excited to see again the overall consolidation of tooling behind the AdAttributionKit. So we'll be really excited to see when we get a couple large third-party app stores that are driving meaningful performance available, likely starting in the EU.
And what do you think too, just about preloads? I know we have a number of big partners we work with that are heavy on preloads on Android. Does this open up a new market for preload type of campaign on iOS devices, or your thoughts there?
I think so. I think, technology-wise, at least on the Android front, the technology used to support the third-party app markets is very similar to the preload technology that's being used for the installation. So I could see an argument being made for the preload business to get more and more traction. Obviously, there's there are a lot of gaps in measurement when it comes to the preload. It is harder to understand if something like a first-time user was due to a low friction user experience, i.e. the app being on device and being able to potentially deep link into the app or something similar, or if it was high intent from a campaign. So those are typically competing signals. And I'd be really curious to see how that fits in from a preload standpoint to the ad attribution kit, and how we would register some type of signal to have a fair advantage on the actual attribution signaling. I don't think day one we'll see preload fit perfectly into the ad attribution kit reporting. So it'll likely still be kind of on its own.
Yeah. Yeah. Nate, I don't know if you had, I think I saw you unmute and then I jumped in, but any thoughts you want to share on this front?
Yeah, no, I think it'll be really interesting to see once, you know, we get a few third-party stores bubbling to the top, you know, and marketers begin to explore those as viable options. It'll be really interesting to see what the adoption looks like across the board on that front. Only because, you know, I mean, it's a natural outgrowth to have these third-party stores, you know, as a result of when it's difficult to measure ad spend. It's a natural, you know, need to leverage those stores. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what that opens up in terms of opportunities and you know, everything that goes along with that. But yeah, to Ethan's point, it will be back to the preload side of things. It'll be very interesting. And again, I know we're a lot of speculation flying around here, like hard to say what's what, but it'll be really interesting to see how that manifests itself, you know, inside the Apple platform versus the what is Android today, which is, you know, we know what that looks like. Be really interesting to see how AdAttributionKit, you know, can be leveraged on the preload side of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, you know, what I'm really excited to see as more third-party app stores start to spin up, what are the requirements to be a eligible third-party app store? You know, the DMA obviously takes it in more of a competitive landscape approach, but the platforms do have a responsibility of their own from the consumer standpoint. So, you know, I think Apple answered that by publishing the ad attribution kit as the framework in which advertising can take place. So I would assume that goes hand in hand with a terms and condition around what is possible for advertising within these stores. And that, I think, is a very positive consolidation of tooling as we get more and more third-party stores starting to spin up. Not a sprawl in how performance can be measured across all of the various locations.
Yeah, and I didn't just think about Apple search ads as an example. Obviously, huge shift following iOS 14.5 and the rollout of the app tracking transparency framework. And we saw Apple search ad share of attributed iOS install volume ascend quite quickly. And so I guess one question I have, and you kind of commented this thing when you mentioned advertising in these third-party app stores, but my understanding right now is that Apple search ads, I don't know that anybody knows for certain, but is not really at the moment integrated into SKAN in the sense of actually impacting attribution outcomes reported through the SKAdNetwork. And so do you think that's something that will shift now that there's third-party app stores, potential competitive advertising from those different marketplaces, and how that all might bubble up?
I hope so. I know, Nate, that's an area that you've spent a lot of time in, but from my standpoint, I would love to see ASA alongside of the SKAD reports. I think there's likely a lot of challenges around the types of results that we get today, and you would lose some signal around the keyword optimization, and that's certainly going to be a challenge. But I think from an overall, what drove these outcomes, looping in ASA as a fair contender with the other ad signals would certainly help reduce the noise that you see between ASA and traditional campaigns that are running. So from that standpoint, I'd love to see it. From a optimization standpoint, maybe not, but curious to get Nate's take on that.
Yeah, I think it'll be, I mean, I would love to see it. And I think it's a natural expectation. When you look at something like AttributionKit, which supports third-party stores, it's the natural inclination to say, okay, well, now let's look at ASA and let's expect to get the same thing out of that. It's hard to say if Apple will get on board with that or not. Again, can only speculate. But would really love to see that happen. And I think it's totally within the realm of possibility that Apple could stand up a framework that is neutral in terms of, or generic in terms of platform, but can be leveraged in the same way that ASA can. We can get attribution results. We can surface those in a privacy-friendly way. You know, at least on the surface, we all know what that should look like, and we know how that could be leveraged. It's, you know, technical lift-wise on the Apple front, you know, obviously bigger lift, bigger sign-off from them that, you know, we can't say as to whether or not that would or wouldn't happen. But yeah, that's something I think would be a natural progression in terms of like how this iteration unfolds. But yeah, too early to say, but I would love to see that happen. I think it's totally realistic that it could happen eventually with a big, you know, all caps eventually. It's a long ways out.
Yeah. Well, let's shift gears here and let's jump into Apple Intelligence, because this is something that I know was one of the predictions that Apple was going to lean into AI, and obviously it was the headliner from WWDC this year. I liked their AI for the rest of us as the tagline to accompany it, with a period, not without a period. And so I guess, you know, just I'm going to open a poll here in the background. So feel free, please, similar to the first poll, jump in and vote on this. But the question is, are you excited to incorporate Apple Intelligence and new Siri capabilities into your app experience? So let us know. We initially had that phrased as, do you plan? But I think maybe it's a little bit too early to say, oh yeah, we've got all these plans in place. It's more of like, hey, are you excited to do so? So vote in there. And as we think about what this means, you know, Ethan, any thoughts, Nathan, you as well, on the new possibilities that Apple highlighted here, right, for how that might be incorporated into app experiences, UX, everything under the sun that an iOS app developer might be looking at?
Yeah, you know, I think there's a lot to unpack with Apple Intelligence, and you know, I think first, and the first one that comes to mind for me when we're watching the announcement was Apple's taken a really intentional approach on how they can roll out AI across specifically their owned and operated app portfolio. So things like the Mail client, Safari, you know, native applications. And I think that's just you know, being inundated with AI as a trend right now. I think that's a really focused, solid product focus for them to roll out on. Not doing something where it all remains within Siri as a you know, more of an assistant. There's certainly new capabilities that were announced with Siri, but I think for myself, I'm most excited about the behind the scenes capabilities that we're just starting to leverage more and more, that streamline the usability of the apps and become more of a habit that we use with. So, you know, I was overall excited just with the announcement. I think the other really big thing that was exciting, and I think certainly will be something to watch as other platforms take out, is the definitive focus that Apple has done, largely because they have their own silicon that they can build in and leverage a lot of these AI capabilities with, but is the on-device capabilities that they're running. We're not seeing things typically reach out to server side, where obviously there's a lot of concerns around, you know, is my interaction being used to further train an AI or a specific model? All of that living on device with proof points that can be validated is super interesting. And I think tying it back to the surprise point that I mentioned earlier, I think that's what shocked me so much about the OpenAI announcement, and being able to intentionally reach out to something like ChatGPT, either for better results or alternative to results than what's proposed on device. So obviously AI is a booming space and will definitely impact the app development landscape. I'm really excited about a lot of, just as a user, let alone some of the other capabilities that Apple has announced, but we'll certainly be paying attention to it from a app developer ecosystem. You know, behind the scenes, one of the things that some people may have picked up on with some of the content recommendations that could be coming out on these platforms. So what websites you should potentially see, what emails based on your inbox should bubble to the top. And I think that's going to be an interesting thing for marketers and advertisers to look out for. Should we expect gamification of AI results? If so, what type of interface do we need to be thinking of to implement that? Is this similar to SEO as an example on websites where we tag our content to get better ranking? Or is it something similar to ASA where we're bidding against certain eligibility of what's happening on the device? So really, really interesting space. Super excited about the announcement, and we'll be paying attention pretty closely.
Yeah. Any thoughts you have, Nathan, as a developer background?
Yeah, I mean, with Apple Intelligence, I think it's a bigger deal than people are treating it, even to the point where I think it's been mocked online in certain venues. But I think it's going to change the way that users interact with their devices fundamentally over time. I don't think it's just some feature ad that you can use, or it's going to change the way that users interact. And just having, for example, mail header, mail organized alone is going to be significant. So now, having said that, that sounds daunting at first, at least from a marketer perspective, but all marketers are going to be challenged equally by this. So it's a level playing field out of the gate here. So it's more of a, once we see what this looks like, it's going to be kind of a race to, first to market with this or that, in terms of what you said, Ethan, whether it be the equivalent of an SEO lift or, something like that. But it'll be really interesting to see what the developer side of this looks like, which is to say, do developers have options? I mean, do they have any access into, or any ability to, leverage AI in any way, or not leverage it, or anything like that? That remains to be seen. But how much, they have control over in terms of the AI, it'll be really interesting to see on the developer side. And that's what I would be watching very closely, because that will, of course, determine how we tackle it from a marketing perspective going forward.
Yeah, even from like you said, the marketing perspective, I know I read an article and it was talking about the reduce interruptions feature, right? And this notion of the AI kind of discerning on behalf of the user what notifications they expect the user will care about. And so, I know that already, I feel inundated by push notifications, but I usually see them all, right, in one form or another. And so this notion that potential prioritization where, is there a chance that something that you send as the client communications team, right, trying to get notifications out to customers, will that actually reach their eyeballs or not? Same thing you said with mail and how that might impact email marketing. And do we as marketers start marketing toward the AI to try and get that prioritization? I think it poses some really key long-term questions. And like you said, it's a bigger deal than maybe it's been credited to, because it will fundamentally change how users interact with their devices and content. So I have the poll up on screen here still, but it looks like, we're about, 50% are excited to incorporate. 12% no, and not sure yet is a good 37, almost 40%. So thanks for letting us know on that. I know we're getting close on time, and I want to make sure we're sensitive to that. So the kind of the last thing we want to jump into is really talking about visionOS and the opportunity around that platform. So I'm going to launch another poll in the background that's really a question of, are you excited to or planning to launch target app experiences that are specific to visionOS specifically? And I know there's this whole notion of, there we go. Okay, it's showing up on screen. But this, all new platform and all new world for developers was something that Apple put out there. So from a developer perspective, what do you foresee, Ethan? Is this going to catch on? Is this going to be the year of VR, and or is it a gimmick and adoption's not going to be significant?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. what obviously the big announcement was the expansion of into new markets, going into the UK, expanding into other avenues. And I think that does show that this now really is a platform where we should expect to see growth, where we should expect to see more adoption. There's a huge category of apps within iOS and Mac that are already natively supported by visionOS for super seamless transition. That doesn't necessarily mean that the user experience is probably the best and tailored for that experience. But another stat that was pushed out was that there are more than 2,000 native visionOS apps currently in the App Store for it. So, I think we will continue to see an adoption of this device, and more users expecting to see native experiences within that platform. So, more opportunities to start figuring out how we can drive more interaction. I think the really cool thing that Apple has been doing for a number of years is the hyper focused on. I don't want to necessarily say owning the user, because that sounds bad, but understanding that their devices need to interoperate between all of their applications. Related to the visionOS announcement, even on Mac, being able to mirror my iPhone. I love being able to transition across devices. Obviously, that engagement and those touch points is between the slew of devices, whether or not it's using the Vision Pro or using your iPhone. It definitely should be on the forefront of a user journey experience from an ads standpoint. So certainly, in my perspective, if you're not looking into visionOS as a potential target, worth evaluating.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I would add that I think that adoption of Vision Pro is certainly going to be, I think, more successful than we've seen with other mixed reality or VR headsets. I think that's without question. But I would say that the ceiling for adoption on something with this form factor is still it's limited. There are only so many people at the end of the day that want to put what is the equivalent of a helmet on your head for an experience. And they've lightened it. It's less bulky than a lot of other headsets have been over the years. So that's great. It's great that they're moving in that direction, but it'll just be really interesting to see what kind of adoption and traction they could get on that front solely from the form factor alone. And we talk about a new platform, like I say new, but when we talk about, a mixed reality platform like this, the desire to adopt that kind of platform, I think, is going to be really heavily dependent on the curated app experience that are, to simply offer your app on that platform isn't really a curated app experience. It's not an experience that's going to bring people to the platform. So it's going to be really interesting to see how many, app developers essentially adopt this platform as a medium for creating their first party experience, which is unique to that platform, unique to mixed reality. And without that, I don't see a whole lot of traction and adoption happening. I see it being, very limited, somewhat gimmicky. And I hate to use that word here because it's an amazing device. It's an amazing experience. If you've used one, it's frankly, it's awesome to put one on and create a virtual, desktop for yourself and do some work. But again, like I get bothered putting a headset on that's a little uncomfortable. So, the idea that you're going to put this thing on your head for 8 hours a day, I think that's a tall ask in reality. And I think that adoption is going to be, largely, it's going to be niche. It's going to be, it's going to be limited by those who are willing to use that sort of thing on a daily basis, long term, all that. So, my opinion may not be the most popular there. I understand that. But it will be interesting to see how many developers really focus on targeting this platform and creating really first-class experiences for that platform. And I think that'll be what dictates whether or not this really takes off or not over time.
Yeah, and I think about verticals too. I mean, obviously, from a media and entertainment perspective, it feels like a win, right? I think about if I was going to use one of these devices, watching a movie would be a way more immersive experience than just the TV, right? But it depends if you're watching a movie on your own versus watching it with your family, right? Or with someone else. So there's that angle. Obviously, gaming seems like a obvious win here. And then, I think of things like, they obviously show a number of examples of people working, right? And this notion of how might this be used in the workplace certainly makes sense for, I think about things like design and,
Right.
Anything like architecture and SCAD designs, I think, or no, CAD designs, I think is one of the programs used by architects. Like there's some really incredible applications, but of course nobody wants to pay they're not going to go into the app to pay their gas bill, through, they don't need to have that on there. Right. So, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens. And just, looking here from the poll results, it looks like we got about 50% are excited now this one is, would you like to develop app experiences targeted to visionOS for Apple Vision Pro? So about 50% yay. We have a little bit no, and then still a good 30+% in the not sure yet camp. So, as the hardware itself becomes more broadly available, I'm curious as we think about the total addressable market against this device, and what does an ad unit, right, look like potentially in the future of a visionOS experience. It seems like ads are in everything now, right? Even the premium, SVOD services have ads. So ad units could get really, really interesting. Well, any we're down to a few minutes here. Are there any closing thoughts, Ethan or Nathan, that you want to leave across the whole range of topics we explored today?
No, I think my main call out would be for those tuning in to explore the third-party app markets. Make sure you understand what changes are coming from the DMA, what AdAttributionKit really intends to unlock from a specific flow standpoint, and then further evaluate the re-engagement support and work with partners like ourselves to look at the rollout, adoption, and the plan. I think to Nate's earlier point, the lack of announcements with Privacy Manifest and Privacy Relay are certainly not an indicator that those exist and that they're continuing to drive a more secure attribution pipe that will ultimately result in signal loss with some of the existing probabilistic or modeled attribution frameworks. So one way or another, I would say, for better or for worse, AdAttributionKit is inevitable, and start integrating.
Yeah, that last point is what I would echo, is that, I would stay ahead of it. If you haven't adopted yet, I would start that process. There's a lot of steps you can take to just get the adoption in place. From a development side, I know it takes development cycles to get this stuff into apps and everything else that goes along with it. But, as has always been the case, you don't want to be in a situation where further down the road, there's some new level of enforcement that comes in, or we lose signal due to something else. And now you're suddenly scrambling to try to get that new visibility back into, the app through scan or whatever other means it is. So that would be, my takeaway here is they're clearly moving in that direction. I think we can read the writing on the wall, and, need to stay ahead of that.
Yeah. And so, just, if you are looking to develop experiences for Vision OS and Apple Vision Pro, and you're looking for measurement, we do here at Kochava have iOS SDK that supports that. Additionally, SKAN AAK solutions for that as well. So if you have iOS apps and are trying to navigate this measurement murky waters, if you will, then get in touch if you're not already working with us, and if you have questions. And thanks for some of the questions in the Q&A. I'll be following up with a couple of you and some of those in chat just directly afterwards to make sure we can follow up on some of those great questions you had and comments as well. So thank you, Ethan and Nathan. We're at the top of the hour, so appreciate the time today unpacking WWDC 24. Have a good one.
Awesome. So thanks, everyone. See ya.
Thank you. Bye.